Hello and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Marcus Sedberry. I'm so thankful for the transformational experience of the NCAA Dr. Charles Whitcomb Leadership Institute. The program was one of the most challenging and rewarding leadership experiences I've ever been a part of. It gave me hands-on strategic planning and career mapping experience. It challenged me to grow personally and equipped me with tangible skills for my professional career. But most of all, it gave me a family of industry experts with shared experiences that I can lean on at any time. Always remember, be loved and be you. Enjoy the episode.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Jessie Gardner. Jessie is an Executive Senior Associate of Leadership and Culture Development and Senior Women Administrator at UNT. Greetings, Jessie.
Good morning. Thank you.
Glad to have you on.
Always glad to be here.
So I've always looked at you and saw how you've done things and consider you an overachiever, right? Somebody who looks for the line to achieve and overachieve. Not just a little bit past the line, but way past the line where you know you're overachieving. And sometimes you wonder why that is with people. But what I found out about you is both of your parents were student athletes, right? And so if you grew up in a household with two student athletes as parents, the overachieveness is probably like rampant in the household. No? Tell me about that aspect of how you're raised.
I definitely think that with my parents, I mean, of course, they're role models for me, and I've always been really grateful for their leadership. My mom and dad both met at the University of Virginia. My dad was a quarterback there and was a pitcher for the baseball team, and I think still holds maybe a record. Not sure exactly, but my mom, she was fortunate to be in the second class of women entered into the Gentlemen's College, and she was on the first women's basketball team. So, I think a lot of times life happens and you look back and you don't realize until after. You look back and you're like, wow, this was destined, or these were experiences that just were a part of my journey. They were part of my destiny in this way, and they help shape you as you go. And so did their experiences have an impact on who I am? Absolutely. It's part of the reason I'm here. And then, from a work perspective and how they've continued on, I feel like I look a lot like my dad's side of the family, but when it comes to my characteristics and some of that overachieving, there's a lot of similarities to my mom. So I do think I get it honestly. Sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse, but all in good favor. So
could you see that in the household? Could you see growing up where there might be some hints of being competitive, or there might be some hints of like things need to be how they need to be?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, especially with sports, my dad has 3 girls, and so I felt like I was always the sporty girl of the family when it came to that. So we watched sports. I felt like there was always kind of this like natural connection to the competitive nature of it with him, and then with my mom, I think just that achieving mentality, whether she means it to be competitive or not, always existed. So I feel like I think it was very present in our household. She's served in a lot of leadership positions and continued to grow in that, and has her own ministry now that she runs. And so it's great to see her pastor churches and things like that. And then my dad, of course, he leads, but it's in such I don't know. He's a leader of people. He's just such a people person. I think that's one of the characteristics I get from him. So much so too, because I think my top 2 strengths really are achiever and woo on the strengths profile, which is really kind of winning others over. And so that's that networking aspect. And so I think both characteristics I get very strongly from both my parents.
Which is interesting. Your mother is a pastor?
Yeah.
And so you've seen her stand up and move the crowd from here to here, right, in the name of the mission, which is super interesting.
Yeah. Well, especially in there's a lot of comparisons here, I think, in the world of, the industry of sports, but also you look back at her experience being the first class of women in the second class women in the Gentlemen's College and on the first women's basketball team. Like, being a pastor in front of a church is not always deemed as a female position. And so, like, she has led in that space. And so this, Women Rise by lifting others. And I admire her for just so much of what she does and how I've gotten to see her in that space. And I feel like that has impacted who I am, in the sports world as well.
The Gentlemen's College. Tell me what that is. I'm not
Just
familiar with that.
Yep. So just Virginia used to only be men.
Okay.
And so when they finally let in the first class of women, I believe my mom was in the second class, but
Okay.
she was on the first women's basketball team.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And-
significant.
Yeah, and she, it's so funny. One of my favorite stories that she told me growing up was the fact that her very first basket for college was in the wrong bucket because they had just changed the rule where you couldn't have a defender, and she was always a defender on the offensive side. So she would rebound and put it right back up, and so she was playing defense and accidentally did the same thing.
Oh, man. Coach probably hit his head on the wall. Like, what are we doing?
Oh, yeah,
bro?
she looked over, her coach's hands were wide in the air. Like,
Like,
what are you doing?
Like, LeBron. Like, what? Come on, bro. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
And then, so was she already, from your earliest memory, was she already in the pulpit, or like, did you see her progress to that?
Progress.
Oh, really?
So she was working. She worked for Easter Seals for a long time, and she used to teach adults with disabilities, and she was always in these executive roles. It's like she couldn't run from it. And then she transitioned over into the church, and she started working really under our pastor, and that's kind of where a lot of that got started. But from the highs and the lows, I mean, the achiever can sometimes be something. It's heavy burden sometimes, to carry, and so she had to navigate that, manage that, and so that's again where I see a lot of it come for me. From a standpoint of being able to watch her really learn and grow and evolve in knowing how to manage your leadership in a way that's positive and progressive for you and others, and then take on these leadership roles, take the risk. Her and my dad's support, allowing her to take the risk to start a ministry and kind of move from there. They actually moved from Florida to Canada for 2.5 years so she could pastor a church that they were called out to, which blew our minds as the kids. Like, you're moving where? Like, wait, what? Like, you're not going to stay in our house forever? So to watch my dad follow her and support her in that, and then they came back, and she really then came in the second role, and watch my dad lead, and so it's just been a really cool dynamic to see that.
Which is interesting. So you watched the ups and downs of her leadership in the house, but the ups and downs of her leadership as she has progressed to this leadership role. And I've known you now for, has it been 10 years, 11 years?
Probably.
Yeah, I don't know how long it's been. But I point that out because I've watched you struggle with the ups and downs of leadership too, right?
Yeah.
And, right, the self-critical, I was interviewing Jared Bosley, and we brought your name up about people who are so self-critical of themselves, right? Yeah. And just feel like they can't get it right, but constantly overachieve, which is an asset on the team, actually, somebody like that. But I watch you struggle with leading other people, and like the Nick Saban, overachievers and mediocre people can't mix. And so you hire somebody on the team, and you try to get them to be the best they can be. And sometimes you struggle with them. They feel like they're the best, all those things, right?
Yep.
And just to see that modeled, right? I wonder, as you have progressed to where you are now, do you refer to what you saw growing up in terms of how was this handled in the household? Or how did she handle that as she became a pastor?
Yeah, I think to a degree, but I also think some of it is just stuff you have to go through and feel yourself. So I think, when it comes to leadership, I mean, we all know leadership is hard, and it should be, because part of leadership is growth. And so I think it's important to have a sense of grace about leadership, because you're not always going to get it right. I mean, I've been here this week. I'm sure I've messed up a couple of things, but I think that expectation, it's good to be an achiever, but striving to be a perfectionist is where you'll fail, because nobody can be perfect. And I think that as I've grown in my leadership, I've really been able to embrace that and really embrace more the achiever mentality than the perfectionism.
Really?
And the perfectionism, I think, early on is kind of where maybe my leadership struggled a little more. Yeah. But it taught me a lot of really good lessons, and I've learned from the staff I've hired, the ones that I had great relationships with, the ones that I've, maybe had a little bit more challenges with, but they were all incredible people, and they've all gone on and continued to do incredible things. We just had to work through some stuff, and my hope is that through, some of that, they learn from me too. So I just think that leadership is a constant evolution of, who you are and how you show up in the world, and it's definitely been a journey.
How long ago did the perfectionist leave the building?
Ooh, good call. sure the perfectionist
Because
drops by
this is
sometimes.
news to me. I need to
Yeah.
understand that, right? This is new.
Yeah, I think, again, in leadership, I think one of the things that we don't do enough of is like, you've got to learn yourself. And if you don't learn yourself, then how are you going to be able to show up in the way that, others are going to need you? So, I've come up in the student athlete development realm, so I geek out over all things leadership development. But sometimes it's so easy to not really reflect on it. And so the Enneagram and Strengths Finder are the
Okay.
two assessments that have really opened up my eyes to who I am and how I show up and how I can manage some of that. So, as simple as you talked about kind of the critical nature. Well, I'm an Enneagram 1, which is a moral perfectionist. And, I wake up and I actually see the world. I see things like that need to be fixed and different. I see how to make things efficient. It's part of my strength. But where that can show up negative is, and this is kind of what I learned in my reflection, is if I have a critical eye, how do I make sure I don't have a critical tone or a critical spirit when it comes to like leading, right? So just because I'm hard on myself because I recognize like that's kind of who I am and that's what I expect, it doesn't mean I have to do it to others. So it's taught me how to, kind of change my tone on some of that, and that was really really impactful for me. But I think the achiever aspect and learning like my strengths quest. Woo is my number 1 strength, achiever number 2, communication I think number 3, and really being able to put a name to achiever is really the perfectionist that I had was really the achiever mentality. So when I started really accepting that more and not allowing myself to say I'm a perfectionist, like yeah, I know deep down in my head I'm not going to get it right. Like we all know that. Nobody is perfect. So I really started just embracing through that learning the achiever mentality. And so when did the perfectionist walk out the door? I think the perfectionist walks around the neighborhood a little bit and pops by once in a while.
Yeah.
So not sure they fully left the space, but I think leadership is, you've got to have grace in leadership. And so you just keep showing up and you get things right, and then you get things wrong and you show up again and you try to get it right again.
Right. There's a concept that's coming up in my brain that when you understand something, the light goes off, but you affirm it when you actually apply it.
Yeah.
And so you understood when the definition of achiever started making sense to you and realizing that being a perfectionist wasn't the best way, but being an achiever actually fits you better. That's when the light went off.
Yep.
And then do you have an example, or can you give an example of applying that when you actually saw that maybe this bullet point is off to the left a little bit, I don't have to be upset about that, or something like that?
Yeah, there's probably 1,000 examples of it.
Give us the good one.
Yeah, on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the workspace, I guess I would take it on as, whenever you're planning an event, for example, to your point, being an achiever, I am high details. I've got it structured out. I've got it painted out. I've got handouts on handouts for everybody to be on the same page, probably over communicate, etc. And you get to an event and it doesn't go the way that you anticipated. And
in the past, you would have what?
Correct. I would have. So here, great example. So when I was at the University of Alabama, we had this incredible event called Halloween Extravaganza.
Okay.
We grew it from having about 600 people, I think, the year we took it over, to within 3 or 4 years, or 3,000 people coming to our indoor to engage with our students. It was a phenomenal community event that members of my team, we put on together, but they really took the lead on a lot of it. And I remember there was this one year, this is probably more when me and the perfectionists were hanging out a lot more, where things were not done. Like we had a line out the door around the corner of people waiting to come in. And it is probably 5 minutes before we're supposed to open the door, and we don't have all our student volunteers there yet. And things weren't set up, and I'm walking around like, well, we've got to open the door. Like, we're not going to keep people waiting and this and that. And so we're getting everybody in place, and as people are kind of funneling in, things are still being set up. And, I think I'm walking around in a panic, and my staff member at the time, who I highly respect and value, and we had a great relationship, at one point came up to me and said, Jessie, this is going to run itself. Enjoy it. You love this event. We'll figure out what we need to do different tomorrow. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. And so, kind of changed my attitude, walked around, had a great night. We reevaluated, we made some changes, etc. Fast forward to UNT and, similar event, or not event, but similar kind of thing, right? You set things up, it doesn't go exactly how you want, and you have to remind yourself that nobody knows that but you.
Exactly.
And so, like, that's where I've seen it change, right? Like, nobody knows it but you. If the objective is accomplished, if it's done the way, if your staff members are, they want it to be just as perfect too. And they try their best to do it, and things are going to go wrong. And as a leader, I've also learned you've got to really support them in that. They got to know that you have their back just as much. And so I feel like that's been the learning for me.
Yeah, which is excellent. One thing Jared Mosley said when I brought your name up, he brought up 2 other people who else are on senior staff there and said everybody's the same way, self-critical, overachiever. I wonder, is there a overachiever radar? Like, can you, when you're working with these people, can you tell when somebody's leaning?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, Connor Smith, when he started, he was the AD at DBU.
Yep.
Yes, so when he started, I remember I'm like, he's shooting off emails like crazy. I mean, that's the over communication, all that. And I walked into his office one day and he was like, I just blew up your email. And I said, you did. And I said, but I'm not mad about it, because I said, communication to me is one of the most important things. And so, he's the type, and I'm sure Jared alluded to this, that if he says he's going to do something, it's going to get done. Like, you don't even have to blink. I think our CFO, Matt Whitty, I mean, he's just on top of things, and he's so forward thinking, and his wealth of knowledge is, beyond what you can imagine. So he's real creative and has fun with it. And our newest member, Charlie Thrash, who just joined our team here last fall, we're still getting to know each other, but I can already tell just, some of the changes he's made and the conversations he's having, and the amount of, he's on the development side external. So the amount of conversations, like the number, the quantity, you're just seeing it rise. And it's, not that you don't expect it, but we just had a giving day where we got our students involved and the ideas that came through. And so it's like, he's really empowering his team to be creative and such. So yeah, that achiever piece, and I really think just leadership, like we have really strong leadership across the board. So I'm really grateful for the team we get to work with every day.
Which is excellent. I'll ask a question here and then we can wrap. People that report into you.
Yeah.
Right? The relationship is different than when you are at Alabama, because you have realized who you are and how you can be successful in who you are. Tell me about that aspect of leading people and allowing people grace to learn how to be great, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I can pinpoint much of it, but I would say that as I've grown in my leadership, I just put a lot more focus on, like, what do they need from me? Like, my job as a leader, you always talk about it. It's like the role of a leader is to create an environment people want to be a part of. And I hear that, and I've internalized that. Like, how do I create spaces that people want to be in and serve? And so again, through my own experiences, I've learned a lot, and the amount of times I go back to some of the learnings I've had, not only in the way that I lead my staff now, but in the conversations I'm having with other staff, and how that they lead, or in staff members who are maybe being led in a certain way and they're struggling and they're asking for or seeking advice. I feel like it's been a tool. It's equipped me really to be able to have a lot of those conversations. And a big part of my role at UNT is the leadership and culture of our staff and our coaches. And so I don't take that lightly, because we all know that, like, we want to be in a place where we spend so much time at work. We want to be in a place where people want to be at. And I look at our mission, building champions and preparing leaders, and I've internalized that. You've got to be a part of a place where you align. And when you look at our mission, you look at our core values, people and their growth, integrity, success, like, these are all things that I think the more that you continue to internalize and align, the more it just pushes you to act in those ways. So, with my staff, I would say I just try to figure out what it is that they want to accomplish. And, when my staff members always chuckle and mess with me a little bit, because they'll bring an idea and I'll say, okay, let me, I'd like to challenge you, or I would consider, and so they have certain phrases that they say, and they
know what that means. That's hilarious.
And so I started catching on when 2 of my staff members, they kind of both smiled and laughed. I'm like, what's going on? They're like, nothing. You just, I challenge you. And they're like, and so that just tells me we have good nature. We have a good time.
Good. They understand the language. At some point, they'll say it to somebody else. Yeah.
Oh, and I've already heard them do it.
Oh, really?
So it's quite comical. But I would say that it's I support them. I want them to know I have their back, and the reality is I know that they have my back, and that's big. Trust is so huge in leadership.
Yeah, which is excellent. Well, Jess, I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast. It sounds like UNT has somebody special in the office working.
I appreciate that. I feel very grateful to be there.
Yes, ma'am. That was Jessie Gardner. She is the Executive Senior Associate Athletics Director for Leadership and Cultural Development and Senior Women Administrator at University of North Texas. And of course, I am Ty Brown with one question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.